Hi, so we're going to read The Expression by Jose Francis. So when you start a passage, you want to preview it. So think about what it could be about. We have that picture. All right. And towards the end, there you have that picture. So start thinking about what it might be out about. You also want to look at the questions. Here it says the theater manager was convinced that the play The Criminals would. You can see that. So it's going to be about a play called The Criminals. Her something called her whoops, Heredia kept putting off the opening of the play because, so something about the play is going to be put off. Heredia acted foolishly. When he was in the hospital, Heredia demanded that. All right, so he was in the hospital, and then we see something about maybe attackers. We look here. What happened in the plot? What sentence characterizes her? I want to see my face. This line of dialogue was spoken by. The theme of the story, we're going to be talking about that. We have some vocabulary: enthusiastically, display, occupied, clench. We also see at the end of the story, why was Heredia eager to look at his face? So we might think about why that would be in the story. Heredia was probably attacked by, so we know she was attacked. Um, Clues in the story suggest that Heredia was attacked because. All right, so now we know that those questions, we can think about what it might be about and make a prediction. All right, let's go ahead and read it now. All right, a few minutes before the curtain went up, the theater manager knocked on the door of Pablo Heredia's dressing room. Heredia, may I come in? He asked. Come in, Louise. Heredia, the star actor, turned his gaze away from the looking glass and faced the manager. What's the matter, Louise? Why so gloomy? Small audience again? Yes, Louise said, frowning. So small that we cannot go on like this. We must put on the other play, The Criminals. We must do it at once, or there will be no money for the salaries next month. He dropped heavily into an armchair near the dressing table, sighing loudly as he did. Heredia did not answer. He turned his attention to the looking glass and continued to put on his makeup. Looking glass is a mirror. There was a long silence. Neither man wanted to speak first. Each was afraid he might say the wrong thing. The manager had great faith in The Criminals. It was a rough and powerful work about crime. 3 months ago, he had eagerly suggested it to Heredia. With the great actor in the main role, the manager was convinced it would be a big hit. At that time, Heredia enthusiastically accepted the play. He agreed it would be his greatest triumph yet, but during practices, Heredia had trouble with the final scene. In the character he plays, in it, the character he plays receives a knife wound and lies dying from loss of blood at the feet of a woman. In those rehearsals, Heredia played the scene with a certain expression on his face, but it was an expression which was not moving enough, not quite right. The theater manager said he was not concerned. He was sure that when the play opened to the public, Heredia's face would perfectly display the expression that the moment required. Yes, everyone was convinced of this. The actors and all the members of the company said no. At first, Heredia was proud of their confidence, but after a while he began to feel a sense of fear, of dread about that final scene. What should the expression on his face be like? It must show rage and pain and love and shame at his defeat, and show them all at once. What should the eyes be like? Should his face grow pale? How should his voice sound? And how should should his hands tremble? Should they claw the air, or should he clench his fists? These were difficult questions, questions to which he could find no answer. Day after day, Heredia stood in front of the looking glass, practicing, but he was still not satisfied. He could not get the expression right. He thought about it all day. It kept him awake at night. On and on the practices went as Heredia put off the opening date. All the actors knew their parts by heart. Still, Heredia delayed and postponed the opening. Now, in the dressing room, Luis, the manager, rose from his armchair. Heredia, he said in a sharp voice, we cannot continue this way. We must put on The Criminals at once. We must set a date. There is no other way. Heredia did not answer at first, but then, unhappily, he agreed. All right, he said uneasily. Let's say 2 weeks from today. We'll make that the opening night. 2 weeks, exclaimed Louise. No, Heredia, certainly not. Today is Monday. The play must go on Friday. That will give us 4 full houses for sure. Opening night on Friday, Saturday evening, and 2 shows on Sunday. 3 days are enough to prepare. You arrange for the final rehearsals, and I'll tell the newspapers and the photographers. Then I'll order posters and tickets for the printers from the printers. Do you agree? Heredia did not answer. Heredia, do you agree? Very well, Heredia replied slowly. I agree. About 2 o'clock in the morning, Heredia left the theater alone. The night was damp and misty, and the chill in the air made him turn up his coat. He walked about aimlessly, eager to be alone, to think. He was concerned, worried, and a bit frightened. He had made an important decision, one which would permit salaries to be paid. And yet, that final scene. How should his face express that terrible moment? What should his eyes be like? Should he grow pale? He walked along, deaf to everything around him. He did not even feel the steady drizzle. All he knew was that opening night was just 3 days away. Gradually, he left the wide main avenues and entered the poorer sections, streets of crime and poverty with lamps that shone yellow. Suddenly, he stopped and looked around him. He had lost his way. He was at the far end of a narrow street. To the left, the darkness of vacant land. To the right, unfriendly buildings with narrow doorways. Not a voice, no sound of footsteps. He started walking back quickly, telling himself he was not afraid. For a moment, the awful silence chilled his heart. Where could he be? He turned a corner and stopped to look down the street. He did not recognize it and continued, more lost than ever, walking down the street after street. All were unfamiliar. He grew more and more anxious. His mouth grew dry and his temples throbbed. By chance, he found himself outside an inn. He opened the door. Heavy, evil-smelling air struck him in the face. He looked in. The room was small and dirty. There were 3 tables occupied and one empty. Behind the counter, a fat man was reading a paper. His entry created much surprise. When he sat down and unbuttoned his fur coat, there were whispers. At one table, a man and a woman spoke in low tones. At a table in the corner, 2 men watched him closely. He ordered something to drink. Then he realized how foolish he had been to enter there, take off his gloves and let them see the jewels on his hands. But there was nothing he could do about that now. So, as he had done in other times of danger, he acted boldly. He stared straight at the 2 men in the corner. They avoided his gaze, looking away. Slowly, the actor's fears turned to curiosity. Either of those 2 men, he thought, could serve as the model for his character and the criminals. They were poorly dressed and might have spent time in jail. But after a brief time, the 2 men, seeing that they were watched, exchanged a few whispered words, then left. Time passed. Heredia got up, paid, and went out into the street. The cold and mist awaited him as before. He looked up and down, wondering which direction to take. Well, it didn't matter. He would come out somewhere. The street was silent and deserted. His steps echoed on the pavement. Long and narrow streets, short and narrow streets. Suddenly, a wide avenue with trees and black factory buildings at the end. He stopped and looked in vain for the lights of a cab. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned and thought he saw 2 men in the mist. Could they be? Heredia continued walking. Suddenly, 2 arms seized him from behind. Someone gave him a push, and he fell forward. Then a blow to the chest, a sharp, cold pain in his side, and he passed out. When he opened his eyes, they were putting him on a bed in the hospital. He felt a terrible throbbing in his side. His throat was dry, his chest was pounding, his forehead damp, and he felt very, very tired. Vaguely, he remembered seeing a knife thrust at him, perhaps death. He also remembered the other thing, the expression, and suddenly, as if insane, he sat up in bed, shouting, "Here, here!" he yelled wildly. "A mirror! Quickly, bring me a mirror. I want to see my face."